Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. We've made it to another Casual Friday. This is Seattle Now. This week, we learned the clock is ticking for online-only school and 100-year-old fruit candy from Central Washington. And the approach of Phase 3 has us recalibrating our personal pandemic risk meters. We're checking in with the South Seattle Emerald's Marcus Green and KUOW's Isolde Raftery in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Well, that was fast. After petitioning Governor Inslee this week, restaurant workers will soon be eligible to try to get a COVID vaccine. The governor opened things up to another 2 million Washingtonians yesterday. That includes people working in restaurants, construction, people who are currently homeless, and anyone 60 and older. If that's you, you can sign up starting March 31st. Hazard pay for some Seattle grocery workers has survived a court challenge. A federal judge threw out a lawsuit that sought to block it yesterday. Two industry groups had argued the ordinance was unconstitutional for interfering with collective bargaining and unfairly targeting large grocery stores. The extra $4 an hour will be in effect for as long as the city's pandemic civil emergency continues. And a class action suit against the University of Washington is moving forward over claims that students haven't gotten what they paid for during the pandemic. Yesterday, a King County Superior Court judge upheld a complaint filed by a UW grad student who wants at least some money back. The suit argues that many of the services and amenities covered by mandatory tuition haven't been available to students. The university closed campus and pivoted to online learning last March. It's Friday again. This week we saw the first glimpses of spring and a possible partial return to schools for some students. And we're all going to be eligible to get vaccinated by May 1st, according to the president, at least. Anybody else thinking about where you'd like to fly 6 months from now? Marcus Green is here with us today. He's the founder and publisher of the South Seattle Emerald. Marcus, what's the first trip you want to go on once you feel comfortable traveling again?
I'm going to be honest with you. I've been cooped up in South Seattle for so long that like Queen Anne and South Lake Union are exotic locales at this point. So, yeah, there you go.
Isolde Raftery is with us as well. She's KUOW's digital editor. Isolde, where are you future tripping to?
I'm going to go to Chicago to see an old friend in October. I'm so excited.
Nice. Big week for vaccine news, so by then we may all be vaccinated. Lumen Field Event Center being described as the biggest non-military vaccine site in the country. And there are lots of newly eligible people who can grab up those appointments. For fans of the technical term, we are in Phase 1, Part B, Tier 2, which includes two different categories, extremely high-risk people and essential workers, but of course, not all of them. And of course, Isolde, as KUOW reported, this opens up a whole other level of plausible deniability in some cases for people, because if you're an essential worker but you aren't on the list, it could be pretty easy to talk yourself into getting that vaccine, rationalizing it, because you're out there.
Yeah, I mean, I am one of those nosy people who will contact anybody and be like, how'd you get the vaccine? Like if they're young and I know that they're not in healthcare. I have heard back from people being like, oh, you can sign up right here. And I'm like, oh no, you thought you could get it because you saw a sign up sheet. You know, it's confusing. So I think there's those people, there's the confused people. And then I think there's the people who are intentionally jumping the line because they feel they need it. But as far as I'm concerned, like that is one less vector in the street who's going to spread the virus. And that's what we need right now. It's like a race against the clock, and we just have to move fast. There's availabilities, just go.
Well, that's the other side of this, is I went on Vaccine Finder. I can see 17, 18 appointments right now, anywhere. So what would stop me? And on the other side of that is I'm feeling a lot of loosey-goosiness among my friends in terms of some of them are vaccinated. They're feeling pretty safe walking around. Some of us who aren't vaccinated are feeling a little less afraid. We are reassessing risk. Marcus. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I will say, like, the other day, I was on a date with an actual human being. Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Capitol Hill. Talk about exotic locales now. But yeah, I mean, just even, sitting over there in Oddfellows, and it was packed and everybody was around, and there was a part of me that was like, gosh, is this a little premature? Am I doing this a little too fast here? It's a give or take. At the same time, we've been cooped up for a year. We want to get back to at least some semblance of normalcy and, familiarity. And so, yeah, you always are taking a risk. You got to ask if the risk is worth it, though.
Well, for the first time, 25% of people in King County have had at least their first vaccine dose. So it actually is getting safer. Isolde, where's your personal risk meter right now?
Oh, I mean, I'm still pretty cooped up. I drove by a brunch spot. I was headed to Gasworks Park with my kids, and I drove past a brunch spot that was completely packed. And like what went through my head is I was like, COVID. You're all going to die of COVID. Like that's and that's where I'm at. And I'm wondering how my reentry will be. I mean, I don't want to share air with you all at work. I just don't. And it'll take me a long time before I'm comfortable with that. I will be there soon. I think when the sun comes out, I want to go play. I miss everybody. But yeah, I don't think I want to come back to work, for example, not for a long time.
Yeah. But wait a minute. Speaking of sharing air, was the date worth it?
I will just say unequivocally yes, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I love it. That's great to hear. That is
so there'll be a second date?
I think so. We'll be, it's early on, but we'll see.
How does dating during COVID work? Because did you have your mask on?
Yes, the mask was on. Other than when we sat down to actually put food into our faces. Other than that, I still haven't been able to eat with the mask on for some reason. I'm trying, but it's not working. So. And I did have a COVID test right before, as did the other person. So yeah.
Wow.
Really?
Stand up guy. That's the way you're doing it. I mean, that's the way dating could happen in COVID. You're right. Wow. I mentioned the vaccine site at Lumen Field. I got emotional seeing those photos. It was such an amazing thing to see that actually happening.
Those photos made me tear up too. And it was the people power of it.
Yeah.
It was just like somebody thought of this. Somebody made it happen. We've had a devastating year and humanity has somehow come up anyway and is really helping out. And I wept. Not wept, but teared up.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, especially because this week there's been a lot of negativity in terms of the stories, obviously in the media, and to see the images, as you said, of human beings and humanity fully on display, it was very heartening and needed, I think, in terms of to break up the news cycle.
Absolutely, I was primed for that hope. I really was. I needed it really, really badly. I don't think I even knew how much I needed it until I saw it. It was so heartening and wonderful. And you're right, Marcus. Really scary stuff happening right now in our country and here in our city. Increasingly, Asian Americans are being targeted, and especially in Atlanta, where the layers of tragedy were just so horrible. 8 people killed, 6 were Asian women. There have been protests and statements of solidarity and also 2 known attacks on Asian people in Seattle's International District. And Marcus, I say known attacks because anybody who has covered this issue before knows that so often these things are just not reported.
Right. They're not reported. And then, there were 49, I believe, that were actually reported last year in 2020. I remember talking to experts for a story that I did on hate crimes here in Seattle, and they said it's probably around 3 times as much as that, right?
Wow.
And just, I don't know. I mean, it's just such a shame, right? That in this day and age, we're here 2021, and that these things continue to happen and happen with increasing regularity. And I mean, and it just continues to show you the need of solidarity with communities who continue to face these attacks within our country and in our city, and just the lack of compassion that I'm seeing around this in some circles is fairly disheartening.
One of the responses that I have heard to this pattern of anti-Asian violence is an emphasis on more policing, right? Mayor Durkin has said something. Chief Diaz has said that the city is going to do something in response. But I have also heard it suggested in more than one way that the police department may not be the most effective path here for resolution, that this gets to a heart of a very nuanced issue in the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more of a societal and cultural response that's needed here, as opposed to sort of a, law enforcement approach. Right? I mean, I just don't think that in this particular case this would work. I think, and even just the minimization at times, right, of some of these crimes. When I believe the Georgia sheriff who took the shooter into custody, Jay Baker, you had Forbes magazine report that he said, "Oh, the guy had a bad day." Well, you know who had a worse day? The 8 people who he killed.
Yeah, that was a reprehensible comment. And I think you're right, Marcus. You hear it a lot. Even in response to stuff we've reported on at KUOW, things that have happened when police show up and say, that guy was just being a jerk. He wasn't being hateful. It wasn't a crime. And that wears on people. That's why those hate crimes aren't reported. That's why people just tuck in.
When I said it should be also mentioned, right? I mean, in that same Forbes article, they reported that the Georgia sheriff who took him into custody, Jay Baker, had posted anti-Asian memes on his Facebook, and had blamed China and all this for the virus. So I mean, who is when you talk about increased law enforcement? I mean, who are some of the people who are going to be quote unquote enforcing some of these laws? So it's.
I watched the press conference there with the Atlanta mayor and the captain, and she had no patience for him. Like, she was like, all right, okay. Like, you just sort of saw her look, and I was like, okay, I know based on how, like, her very light side eye, that he is not to be trusted. Like, she knows something. And then, of course, that came out.
Oh my gosh. One more story before we go. We learned this week that Aplets and Cotlets will soon be no more. If you don't know the confection, it's basically a local take on Turkish delight with apple and apricot bits in it. And it's made by Liberty Orchards out in Kashmir. But people definitely have opinions about this candy. Isolde, what is yours?
I mean, kind of gross. Am I allowed to say that?
Well, after more than 100 years, the small family factory is shutting down because the generation that would inherit the business is off doing other things. So rest in peace, Aplets and Cotlets. Marcus, have you had these candies?
Yes, and the best I can say about it is, like, it's the gift you would get when, you're rushing home for the holidays or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, my sister, she has a new boyfriend. I didn't get him anything. What do I? Aplets and Cotlets, of course. Right? I mean, that is like the extent, I think, of that, right? And they pretend to be happy when they get it. Oh, and it's quickly regifted to somebody else. I mean, that's kind of what it was.
Totally. Like, what percentage of Aplets and Cotlets are consumed, and what percent end up in the garbage can?
Well, it was garbage fruit that they started making these from. This was a way for them to use the garbage fruit that they couldn't send to the stores.
The circle of life.
My only experience with this candy was right after I moved here, and I got called into a meeting with our old program director. And I walked in and he said, "Would you like an Aplet and Cotlet? They're famous candies." And I said, "Okay." And I put it in my mouth, and the minute I did that, I knew it was a mistake.
He had obviously been gifted that from somebody else, and he was regifting. I just want to say.
The most regifted candy in Washington State.
Oh my gosh. All right, we're leaving it there. That's our show for this week. Thanks again to my guests, Isolde Raftery, KUOW's managing online editor, and Marcus Green, the founder and publisher of the South Seattle Emerald. Thanks, you two.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you Monday.